So we're just going live on YouTube now. So Aparajita, I would like to mention here that this is being streamed live on YouTube also.
Okay.
Ash, we can start, I think, because we are live on YouTube. So let's not wait now anymore.
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I, Arsh, on behalf of Epitome, the Economic Society of Shivaji College, extend my warmest greetings to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Nishit Prakash and Dr. Aparajita Das Gupta, respected Principal Dr. Shiv Kumar Sehdev, our faculty, and all the participants. I welcome you all to the first international webinar hosted by the Department of Economics in collaboration with Alumni Relations Cell. Before we move further, I would like to request all the participants to follow the protocols. All the participants are requested to rename themselves with the registered names only. Participants are requested to keep their video disabled and audio on mute during the entire session. The queries from the participants will be taken at the end in Q&A session only through the chat box. You can drop your questions during the session too. The chat box is to be strictly used for the purpose of passing on instructions and asking questions related to the webinar only. We request your cooperation in conducting the session smoothly. Epitome, the Economic Society of Shivaji College, over the years has strived for essentially creating and exploring the dialogue for thought-provoking and insightful intellectual economic discussions. Today is no exception. We are all gathered here virtually during a global pandemic to celebrate this strive for achieving a better understanding of our fundamental economic principles. Social inclusion is defined as the process of improving the terms of participation in society. Making development sustainable is not only fundamental to economic principles, but also an essentiality of times where we seem to be on short of it. Making big, bold steps now, collectively, as a society free from discrimination, is an essentiality as inevitable as finding growth through progressive development to keep up with the fast pace of changing times. Foreseeing these requirements to create a more inclusive world, the leaders from over 195 countries adopted the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, with sustainability and inclusivity lying at the core of these global goals. The SDGs are a commitment towards leaving no one behind. However, if the numbers are to be believed, India has a long way to go to achieve these goals. To take these discussions forward and to delve deeper into them, we have invited Dr. Nishit Prakash, Associate Professor at the University of Connecticut, United States, and Dr. Aparajita Das Gupta, Assistant Professor at Ashoka University. I would now like to invite our respected principal, Dr. Shiv Kumar Sehdev, to address the audience.
Thank you, Harsh. Dr. Nishit Prakash, Dr. Aparajita Das Gupta, all esteemed guests, dear colleagues and dear students. I'm very happy that Department of Economics under the Economic Society of the Department and Alumni Relations Cell has jointly organized today's international webinar on a very important topic of social inclusion, making development sustainable. And I must say that both these units, Economics Department and our Alumni Relations Cell, are a very active component of Shivaji College. And my wishes to all of you. And I'm sure that you will enjoy this webinar. And my greetings and wishes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for supporting us. I would now like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Aparajita Das Gupta. Dr. Aparajita Das Gupta is an assistant professor of economics at Ashoka University. An applied microeconomist by training, She holds a PhD in economics from the University of California, Riverside. Her research interests are in the areas of development economics, health economics, and public policy. Her research contributes to the growing literature on the dynamics of human capital formation, where she is interested to understand the causal linkages between early childhood environment and later life outcomes such as health, fertility, cognition, schooling, labor market outcomes, and intergeneration mobility. Further, she is keen to understand how households decide to invest at each stages of life and how do these decisions vary by socio-political and gender norms in society. She also has extensive fieldwork experience in Andhra Pradesh for her research work, which examines the causal impact of National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, NREGA, in buffering impacts of drought shocks on long-term nutritional outcomes in children. Dr. Das Gupta has also worked as an evaluation specialist at 3IE, where she managed and reviewed research of impact evaluation grants in cross-country settings. She served as the Fred H. Bixby postdoctoral fellow at the Population Council, where she worked on impact evaluation and cost effectiveness of an HIV prevention service in New Delhi, India. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks for the warm invitation and introduction. So I'm very happy to join this webinar and share some of my findings from some of my projects with you. So let me start. Let me share my screen. So let me know when you are able to see my screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes,
ma'am.
we can see that.
Okay, great. So at the outset, I thought of linking some of the key topics which matters for sustainable development, and this also ties to some of my current research projects. And so this is I'll share a broad overview of some of the problems that we are looking as researchers, and some findings from the projects that I have been involved with along with my colleagues. So the title for today's presentation is Social Norms and Development, Linking Gender Bias, Health Outcomes, and Labor Force Participation in India. So here I want to highlight that throughout my talk, I'll highlight the role of social norms and how they can play a major role in the development outcomes, which matter for sustainable development goals that we are talking about. So in terms of the outline of the presentation, so first I'll give you a brief overview of the problem of the decline in female labor force participation in India. And then I'll talk about, some of the findings from a research project on that line. Then I'll also talk about the role of gender norms and how they matter for health outcomes, and how health outcomes in general play a big role in human capital formation and later life outcomes. And then I'll give you a brief overview of a project, which is again with one of my colleagues, looking at the role of legal sanctions involving some of the gender debates on these key outcomes. So without further ado, let me jump into straight the first problem that I was mentioning, which is understanding the decline in female labor force participation in India. So this is all, you may know this already, that since 2004-5, the female labor force participation has declined very, very sharply. It stands around 27%, which is substantially lower as compared to our neighboring countries. For example, in Bangladesh, it is around 33%, and which is seen an increase between this point and 2020, and so India is on a declining path, and this is also marginally higher than in Pakistan, and I believe the female labor force participation is on an increasing trajectory in these two neighboring countries, whereas for India, it is on a declining trajectory, which is a point of concern. Now, to understand from where this decline is coming from, so if you look at the data, it seems to be the case that the rural sector is driving the sharp decline in the female labor force participation since 2004-5. So typically, if you compare the female labor force participation between rural and urban, rural sector has always had higher participation for female labor force as compared to urban. However, it is in the rural sector that we see the decline to be the sharper. So urban areas saw a decline of 21% in urban sector female labor force participation was 21%, declined to 19% in 2011-12, and in rural it was 39% in 2004-5, declined to 27% in 11-12, and these are figures from the IHDS data, India Human Development Survey. And so if once, so these are the two rounds of the panel data, which is really an important source of data on this topic. And so once the third round actually comes up, it would be clear what the status looks like at this point and what has happened to the change in between. And especially this would be of interest because, sorry, it is, I think, very important and critical to understand how female labor force participation changes in response to the current economic shock, because some of the norms around labor force, work flexibility, work from home, these things have also changed. So it is, one cannot say a priori what is going to happen to female labor force participation during a crisis like this. And so I think understanding the change which has happened over time between round 2 and round 3 of the IHDS data would be very, very important. And so if you look at the first 2 rounds of IHDS data, this decline has been the sharpest for women aged 25 to 54. And so, sorry, it has declined from 57 to 44% in rural areas between 1987 and 2011. So if you look at the longer time horizon, this is how the decline looks like. Now, in order to give you the background that how this decline compares to the growth trajectory that India was facing, so sorry, so this decline looks is really a sharp contrast, and is really a puzzle, because this decline has happened in the face of very high economic growth, at least in the last decade. And so economic growth was averaging 6 to 7% in 1990s and 2000s. We also saw a massive decline in fertility levels, which is also conducive to increase in female labor force participation. Not only that, we have also seen an increase in female education level. So these are all factors that would predict more participation of females in the labor force.
Prajita, can I just intervene? Could you just adjust your mic? Some people are saying in the chat box that there is a little problem with the mic. So if
okay, sorry.
ठीक ठीक है तो चलो
Is this better?
गुस्सा ना दिलाओ अब गुस्सा ना दिलाओ
Hello. Hello. Hello.
yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So so can you hear me now? Is it
Yes.
better?
Yeah, better. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. So what is more problematic is that because of the high demographic dividend, India could actually reap from the high demographic dividend with the high share of working age people, uh, which can drive the per capita growth rates through work savings and investments. And given the reports that we have seen in recent times, that because of the crisis and the what has the impacts on growth that it has had, it is even more important and critical. We recognize the power of the demographic dividend, and we recognize this this critical component of this low female labor force participation, which could actually make a difference in the otherwise bleak situation. So it is clear that it was already low to begin with, and then it was on a declining path. And now with the current crisis, where the growth has had been hit hugely, and which has implications on a labor force participation for both males and females, I think it is very critical to understand the role of demand supply, which can play in increasing the participation, and especially what can we think of in terms of increasing the female labor force participation, which is already on a declining path. So you might ask that why does it matter? Why female labor force participation matters? Because development as a process enhances freedoms equally for all individuals, as mentioned by Professor Amartya Sen. And so gender equality in the labor market is an end in itself. So apart from being the means to improve growth outcomes, gender equality in the labor market could be thought of as an end goal in itself. And not only that, if you think that earlier research has documented that how female labor force participation plays an instrumental role. So this is the mean story. It plays the instrumental role in driving growth for the whole country. And so not only that, it has these socioeconomic implications that go beyond the immediate loss of productivity that the country suffers, a decline in female labor force participation. So this paper by Farzana Afridi and colleagues finds that mothers' participation in labor force improves schooling outcomes of children, by increasing her decision-making power within the household. We have, evidence all across the world. For example, this paper by Chian finds that increasing relative female income in the household improves the survival rates of girls and improves educational attainment of all children. Taking evidence from Ghana, this paper by Doss finds that women typically spend more on married goods like food and education, which has implications on human capital development for the children, which again matters for labor force participation in the long run, their human capital attainment, for example, schooling and labor force outcomes like wages and health outcomes in the long run and whatnot. Not only that, women in waged work also report higher levels of joint and individual decision making. So that has also spillover effects on other outcomes of interest in the development literature. So this is on this note, this paper by Fatima finds that women participating in the labor force have higher agency in the use of contraceptives, allocation of household expenditure, how much they would like to spend on child health, education, and so on. This paper by Kalsi finds that villages that are exposed to more female leaders show lower rates of sex selection. Now, let me talk about what we do in this project. So this is my first project that I'm going to talk about, which is trying to understand the decline in female labor force participation in India. And so we investigate the causal mechanisms behind the decline among the rural SC/ST women. And here we try to isolate the demand side, the supply side, and the measurement arguments. So let us, go briefly over the conceptual framework which drives the female labor force participation. So on the demand side factor, we have factors like structural transformation. For example, let's say there's this new mechanized way of producing things, and so this structural transformation using machines and all may have displaced female labor, and so it could mean jobless growth for few female intensive sectors. On the supply side, which is trying to understand that why the female workers would want to go and work and supply labor. So here it could be that, factors like rise in female education, where previously those who didn't go to college, they were participating in the labor force, and now because of increased access to college education, they are less likely to participate in the labor force, which is a good thing, right? And so there might be supply side factors like that going on. Or it could be, if they are facing higher restrictions in social norms from their peers, from their household members, the partners. So if it is the fact that, they are facing more restrictive norms on participating and working by stepping outside the house, so that is also an important factor which we want to understand. And the third factor in this debate is the issue of measurement. So there's a lot of documentation done on how some of these concepts, like what people perceive as work, is very different across subgroups. And so people may have systematically different thresholds when they report about whether they have participated in work or not, because the whole concept of work is very different, across people by specific subgroups. And so, this is again, we want to understand this part in our research project. um, and so we want to isolate these three factors: the demand side factors, supply side, and the measurement issue, and try to see what is going on and what can explain the decline in female labor force participation. So is it more likely that there has been massive shifts in structural transformation, which is really the demand side, or is it more restrictive norms on the supply side, or is it really a combination of both? And so another point is how much of that can be explained by how these participation is measured. And so this is really the measurement issue. And so what may have happened over time is also there could be changes in the way these information is being captured in a survey. So on that note, so in our research project, which I have conducted with two of my colleagues, we aim to understand what explains this decline and what has happened to the time use patterns for women when they are no longer working. So if the woman has stopped working, what has happened to their time use? Are they spending more time in education, or let's say self care? So in terms of the 24 hours that are available to all individuals, how has the time use patterns changed over time? So can we say women are enjoying more leisure instead when they opt out of labor market? So on this note, so there's little work. So in terms of the existing evidence, there's scant evidence on the role of social norms using a causal econometric framework. And so here what we do is we employ what is called vignettes. These are you can think that these are descriptions of third party scenarios. These are like stories, and I'll give you one example to make this thing clear. And so this enables one to assess how people may have very different perceptions of work in the first place, and so how they might be reporting these things, and so how we can understand how we can use the self-reported information from regular surveys like the NSS or other regular household surveys. And so vignettes have been used in political economics, political science, and now it is getting more and more popular. And so in the field of health and labor, and so we build on to this growing body of literature. And so let me give you an example of a vignette in question. Okay, so this is one example of a vignette. So here, so look at the first example. This is just saying describing a third party scenario about a woman in a village in Haryana. And so I should make it clear that we interviewed 960 households from 2 districts in UP and Haryana. And so we are using local names, and we are using these examples such that the respondents can relate to the question. And so look at this question that we have used. So this is just an example of the series of questions we had asked to the respondents. And so this is just describing a third party scenario of someone who is living in a village, giving some details about her household household members, her activities like cooking and cleaning and collecting water and teaching, and she's making food, and helps in the food processing, and she also makes clothes using a sewing machine and so on. And so then we ask, do you agree that she is unemployed? And so, by this, there's no right or wrong answer. We just want to understand how people perceive these situations, and how they might be, using very, very different thresholds when it comes to reporting about their own work. Similarly, this is another example. This is about a man, um, and so he has dropped out of school and now he's managing a grocery store. And so we ask, do you think he is unemployed? And the rating is on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree. And this is how it looks like by the education level of the household head. And so these are the two regions. One is Jhajjar is from Haryana and Pilibhit is from UP. And so what you see is, and these are the two panels describe the situation for the two questions I just showed you. So what you could see here is that there's a lot of heterogeneity by the region in terms of how you perceive a particular situation. So this is for the same question, right? um, and so this this difference, by Jhajjar and Pilibhit, and this I have split by the two education categories. So on the right, these two bars are for households where the education of the household head is higher than primary, and this is lower than primary level. And so you see, at the outset, you see there's a systematic difference by the region, which is, between UP and between Haryana and UP, and also by the, the education level. Similarly, um, so in terms of the findings, we find that there's significant difference by region, education, and caste categories. Another thing, and this is really interesting, is that we had also included an experimental setup, um, where we asked both the partners. So for example, the wife, about the, what she perceives her husband's attitude to be, in terms of whether the husband is going to support her working outside, and vice versa. And so we wanted to understand how they perceive about their partners preferences. And not only that, what do they think about, what the average villager, or what the average village opinion is about females going outside to work. And so we had asked, if we go and interview 10 people from this village, how many out of those 10 would agree with females going and working outside? And so this is really interesting, the finding that we have. So we found that, in both Jhajjar and Pilibhit, both females and males overestimate the conservative behavior of their village, meaning that they perceive that, they are villagers, the village opinion, as they think that, they are not going to support females going and working outside. Whereas in reality, when we look at the numbers of people who would support such a decision, is higher in reality. And so there's this wedge between what is happening in actual, and what people think about what other people might think. And so, there's this gap. And so if you think that, there's this role of social norms, that, what peers think about you matter for your own decision making. So I think there's a lot of room for policy here, in order to correct their beliefs of the individuals about that, the level of attitude about the village in question. And so there's a recent paper which is in the context of Saudi Arabia, which has done a similar experiment. And even there, the result that they find is very similar to what we find. And so again, people are in general they overestimate the conservative attitude of their peer group. And so, in the second stage of the experiment, what they had is, they had given back this information which is trying to correct the false beliefs of individuals. And as a result, in the second period, they found that the actual female labor force participation actually went up in response to um, a correction of the beliefs, when this information was given back, that okay, what you might be thinking about your neighbors is not correct, right? And so they are more supportive of females going and working outside than what you had estimated. And so once that was clear, so there was a response in terms of household participation, right? And so there's a lot of room for policy making here. Also interesting is that, this level of overestimation was higher uh, in terms of households where the heads of the households had education primary and above. So more educated people had, uh, they they suffered from more overestimation of conservative attitude. So they were more likely to think that their neighbors are not going to support females going and working outside. And also there's difference by some of the other characteristics. For example, in Jhajjar, the extent of overestimation was higher among landless households. In Pilibhit, the extent of overestimation was higher among land owning households. So you could see, that often these dynamics, for example, how landless households might be behaving and perceiving these concepts about female labor force participation may be systematic to the region that you are coming from, right? And so it is very, very important to understand these differences to increase actual participation in the labor force. So just very briefly, um, I just mentioned this from a project of mine. um, and so so this is just repeating what I just mentioned here about this experimental result that we obtained, which I thought is pretty interesting, and it has these policy insights. Now, in terms of on this project, on this note, I think that the micro and macroeconomic implications of India's low and declining female labor force participation have adverse consequences. And so it's really important to understand the role of social norms here. And so one of the important area is really to improve data collection, and through regular and periodic surveys, and making it available to researchers and policymakers for enabling research to happen. um, so on that note, so we had also collected information on this labor market decisions of every household member and detailed time use. And apart from that, we also um, we also collected information on the demand side, like in every village, um, whether they have workers coming from outside, or whether workers have to leave the village and find work. So in terms of understanding the demand side, like whether farms would take laborers from that village or not, so we had included information on that also, average wage and so on. So on one hand, we have tried to incorporate the information on household norms around labor force participation for females. On the other hand, we have collected information on what is happening to the village at large in terms of the wage rates and work opportunities, which is really the demand side. And using these vignette style questions, we also get a handle of understanding how people perceive and report work. So the measurement issue which I was talking about. So this is in terms of my first project, I have this result. How much time do I have? I could briefly give you an overview of my two other projects, but
Yeah, you can continue. We still have time.
okay.
So maybe another 10 minutes.
Okay, great. So please let me know when I have to stop.
Okay.
So okay, so let me just briefly give you an overview of two of my other projects. So here the other one is trying to understand how human capital investment in early life. So basically, investments in education and health, how does it matter in the long run scheme of things? So in this, there's a large body of literature already which documents that how the standard indicator like average height of a population's children is recognized as an important measure of human capital, human development. Now this literature, which is really, it has become massive, it points to this important role of early life investments, that you have to make these investments pretty early in life, between the 0 to 5 years. And there's this argument that the first 1,000 days are the critical days for they are the most critical period for any kind of investment, which has huge returns down the line in terms of their cognitive outcomes, health outcomes, um, labor market outcomes, and so on. And so this goes beyond a generation, so this has intergenerational consequences. Now, on this note, I must highlight one thing which I think is important to recognize. There's this dearth of micro data on child health and nutrition. So, in the Indian context, we are typically reliant on this database, which is the NFHS, which is National Family Health Survey. So that really does a good job, but in terms of collecting very disaggregated rich information on health and demographic outcomes, um, but the problem is that the survey is what typically happens with quite some gap. So we have had like 4 rounds of the survey so far. NFHS round 1, 2, 3, 4, and so the round 5 was about to come this year, or maybe next year beginning, but because of the COVID crisis, everything is now pushed back. And so we don't know when we are going to get the recent data on nutrition and health outcomes for children, and which is extremely critical to understand, thinking about the concept of sustainable development. This is one of the first things that we should be focusing on. And to focus on, we should in the first place need the data to understand what is going on. So in this paper by Diane Coffey and Dean Spears, they look at this, they try to understand using the successive NFHS rounds, what has happened to India's overall height deficit. And so whether, this the change in height for age, this which is the indicator for the anthropometric indicator, which is a standard indicator for nutrition, how that has changed over time. And they try to make this, understand this in context of what has happened to economic progress. So I should show you this graph, which is out of their paper. And what you could see is that typically, so the mean height for age, so which is, you are plotting on the vertical axis. On the x-axis you have age of the child, and so this typically goes down between the first few months. And this is for the NFHS 3, so all are in negative scores, which means that on average, the height for age for Indian children, in relation to relatively healthy children, so which is set as 0, we are doing pretty badly, right? And if you look at the graphs for NFHS 3, which is in year 2005-6, and compared that to the situation in NFHS 4, which is 2015-16, you see there's slight improvement in the health outcomes, so it becomes less negative. However, this improvement is not impressive if you think about what has happened to economic growth in that time period, and so on. And so these factors of just trying to understand what are the factors that might be driving malnutrition, and the changes in malnutrition is important here. And by gender, this is an interesting finding, is that despite the discrimination which typically happens and which is so pervasive in India, Indian girls are not shorter than Indian boys. And so this might come as a surprise, considering the widespread nature of the gender discrimination. However, if you look at what is happening in other countries, you see that in other countries, typically the heights of girls are higher than that of boys, the height for age, that is. And so if you find that there's no difference in the average height for age between girls and boys under 5 years, it might indicate that there is discrimination that is going on with respect to the girl child. And so some of the factors which have been highlighted in earlier literature is the role of maternal nutrition. So 50% and more of Indian women are anemic. So more than half of Indian women are anemic, so which is a huge public health problem for us. In terms of open defecation, again the role of social norms come into play. So just trying to understand why it is very, very challenging to move people's preferences when it comes to open defecation. I think some of the recent papers actually document that the important role of beliefs and preferences which play in this debate. Then of course I have given you some context on the role of female labor force participation and how it might influence other outcomes. Interestingly, the fertility has come down over time, but it has its own dynamics. So there's a literature which tries to link between fertility and infant mortality. In that context, again, gender discrimination, how does it interact with decline in fertility is interesting to understand. So there are papers, some of the recent papers have documented that, as soon as fertility goes down, because of the, pervasive nature of sun preference that we have in our country, this even manifests, perverse spillover unintended consequences on the sex ratio. at birth, or even the sex ratio in the age group of 0 to 5 years. And so here I just wanted to highlight, a couple of papers which are trying to understand the role of legal norms on improving gender outcomes. So there's a recent paper by Anukriti, Sonia Balotra, and colleagues in understanding the role of technology access to sex selection on infant mortality. And what they find is that when you have the access to abort, it is associated with decline in infant mortality and under 5 mortality for girls, because here the argument is that you would see typically girls who are being born now are wanted. And so this is a recent project which I have with a colleague, where we are trying to understand the role of the PNDT Act, which is trying to put a ban on this technology. And so now this is totally banned, the detection of sex of the fetus. And so what impact it had on these gender based outcomes. And at the outset we find that this is associated with increase in infant mortality for girls. And so the simple idea is that the incidence of unwanted girls and the associated mortality increase could be explaining this result. So I think,
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Aprajita. I would like to request you to end the discussion due to shortage of time,
yeah,
so that we can start with
sure.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so maybe here I just wanted to end on this note, that some of the recent drives on gender, which also involves the sensitization campaigns on which might change people's preferences about wanting the girl child in the first place, can actually work. And so I think it's important to isolate these two components of these drives. And one example is this Beti Bachao Beti Padhao program, which has both of these components. So one is really the supply side crackdown on sex detection clinics. On the other hand, it is trying to sensitize and improve innate preferences for girl children. And so which part of these this type of campaigns work in actual improvement of outcomes is, I think, a very interesting and important ground for future research. So on that note, let me stop here. I'm happy to take your questions. So let me stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am, the first question for you is, while the male height and female height differ biologically, so while comparing them among children, was this factor kept in mind?
Yes.
Also, the reasons behind short height could be many, like genetic and so on. So how all these constructs were measured?
Okay, so here I should clarify that we were referring to height for age, which is really the normalized score, where you take the difference of the actual height with respect to someone from your age and the gender, keeping those aspects the same. From a relatively healthier population, how are you faring in comparison to that, right? And so these concerns about innate genetic differences and differences by gender is taken care of. And so whatever I was mentioning is over and above that, where you are just comparing normalized scores.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. The second question is, you mentioned that female labor force participation rate has been declining in India.
Mhm.
To what extent do you think this problem will be aggravated by the current COVID-19 pandemic?
Okay, I think this is a very interesting question. And so keep in mind, the conceptual framework I mentioned. So we have to think about, how the current crisis may affect the three components that I mentioned, which is the supply side, where, this might have to deal with the social norms about, participating in the labor force, versus the demand side, which is really the firms, hiring side, whether what has happened to that aspect. And so, given the, we have seen that some of the recent, I think, working papers on this line have mentioned that because of the pandemic, there has been, shifts in some of the gender norms within the household, where, there's a scope for sharing household chores between the partners, as well as, the norms have also changed with respect to the employer side. So for example, if you think about work from home type of situation which has now come about, it might, increase female labor force participation in that aspect. So how it would play up, what has happened to the demand side, which we have seen there has been a massive um, decline in some of the demand side components. And so if that has differentially affected the sectors which employ female laborers, that I think could be a big hit. And also, trying to understand the supply side, where, it might be easier for women to adjust these, expectations within the household, and also simultaneously work. So I think these two, keeping these two factors and how they might respond to the pandemic is what we have to see.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is, there was news flash in UK where it stated that the pension gap between the genders is narrowing down with the passage of time. So considering it, whether the female force participation forced it to make it happen, or is there any intervention of the government?
So for the UK example, I have to, look up the details. But, a related point which I could mention is, I think the important question is, what role does social security play in this, whole scheme of things? And so there has been a lot of documented research which links the availability of social security with son preference. So where you might expect, with the availability of social security, you would have lower son preference, which is so pervasive in our country, and so which may have implications on fertility outcomes. You are more likely to have less number of children, which could, impact the labor force participation, which could actually increase the labor force participation. And so I think these are all very interesting questions for research. One needs to just have, the access to micro data in order to make these inferences.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now take the last question. Pollution impacts nutrition absorption. Is this being taken into consideration in impact on nutrition and health, and therefore heights?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So, typically, as I just showed you, between the first few years of life, the height for age actually goes down between the first few years. And so, some of the factors that play a role in this is these, the role of environmental factors, including pollution. And so the idea is that right at birth, if you are, from a developing part of the world, the height for age Z-score that you are associated, that you have, it's likely to go down given the role of environmental factors. So there's, a lot of research documenting how, let's say, exposure to PM 2.5 has, impacts on human capital formation, including, height and BMI and weight and so on. And so, obviously pollution plays a role that has been documented. But when we are comparing what has happened over time and looking at the same age cohort of children, and so the graph that I showed you, that's comparing the stats between NFHS 3 and 4, that has controlled for the pollution aspect. And so this pollution definitely plays a role, but one can look at what has happened over time for the same age group to control for these effects.
Thank you, ma'am, for answering all the questions of the participants. I would like to thank you for providing us such useful insights into the topic. And thank you for sparing time from your busy schedule and joining us in this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for invitation and thanks for the great questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I would hand over to Alumni Relations Cell member Shruti. Over to you, Shruti.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I am Shruti, the General Secretary of Alumni Relations Cell, Shivaji College. Before we commence with the second session, let me walk you through the journey of ARC. ARC got established in January 2020. It is a platform where the current students can learn from the former students, seek guidance and one-on-one mentorship. This is the culmination of the vision of our Honorable Principal, Dr. Shiv Kumar Sahadev, our highly supportive convener, Dr. Darshan Pandey, and the co-founders, Nishtha Sethi and Vaibhav Sinha. Before I request Dr. Nishit Prakash to speak, let me take you through his iconic career. Dr. Nishit Prakash is an associate professor of economics in a joint position with the Department of Economics and the Human Rights Institute at University of Connecticut, USA. He is a Shivaji alumnus and has earned his MA in economics from Delhi School of Economics and a PhD in economics from University of Houston. Apart from this, he has been an integral part of many prestigious universities like Ohio University, Harvard Kennedy School, Yale University, Columbia University, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is currently serving in the editorial board of the journal Economies. He is a research fellow at the Center for Research and Analysis of Migration, the Institute for the Study of Labor, Households in Conflict Network, and many more. Dr. Prakash has an experience in conducting surveys in developing countries, working with large-scale observational and administrative datasets, and in conducting field experiments. He has worked closely with the Department of Education in Bihar, Nepal, Zanzibar, and Zambia, with the state police in Bihar and Telangana, and on several projects with the World Bank. His teaching interests include development economics, economics of gender and inequality. His research has been covered in many national and international newspapers like The Economist, World Bank Development Impact Blog, World Economic Oh, was I muted?
Yeah. Somebody, I think, yeah, you can just go through this again, Shruti.
From the starting?
No, just from here only.
Okay. His research has been covered in many national and international newspapers like The Economist, World Bank Development Impact Blog, World Economic Forum, The Atlantic, The Indian Express, The Hindu, and so on. It is indeed a pleasure to have you here, sir. May I request you to share your work? Over to Dr. Nishit Prakash.
Thank you, Shruti. Just to make sure, can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you for this, first of all, finding me out on LinkedIn. which I hesitantly joined after several years, and reaching out for the talk. You read a very glamorous stuff which is on the web. Might not everything be true, or might not everything be visible, since it's a talk to my home institution. I think I might want to share a few things that's not written out there, although I share those things with my students. So I have been in touch with Ansh Chopra ma'am. She taught me at Shivaji College in my first year. I don't think I attended many classes, but that was the time when you could actually skip classes. And I don't think I recall anyone else as a faculty who used to be there. I think Mamta had maybe just joined something.
Mamta has gone to Canada now. She's in Canada now.
Oh, she's in Canada, but she had joined probably when I was in the third year or maybe in the second year. So I joined Shivaji in 1996, several, maybe 2.5 decades ago. And after I finished my high school in Ranchi, supposedly a good school, now popularly known where Dhoni studied, I come to Delhi University applying for those forms, no idea how things happen. And I was, after, not so devastated because I didn't study in high school. So I had a 68, 69%, end up in Shivaji College. No idea what a college looks like.
So I would like to share now that the cutoff is 96.
I know, I see that every year.
Yes. Yeah.
So I go to college and attend few classes, feeling very homesick, especially when you are from a different state, you don't have a good place to stay. I found something in Paschim Puri, and after maybe just a few days, I said, you know what, I don't think I can do this. So I went back home. And I go back home, and my parents are like, oh my God, this guy is a disaster. Like, he's not going to do anything in life. And I can't recall, but we were in Ranchi for several years till 99, 2000. My father was a civil servant, and he's like, okay, so ये कुछ करेगा नहीं, so ऐसा करते हैं कि डोरंडा कॉलेज में एडमिशन करा देते हैं. It's a small college in Ranchi, and I think that threat actually worked. So I went back, and I used to sleep a lot. So I used to sleep almost whole day, wake up, be awake whole night, and I thought it's college is like high school, so I can study a few hours and get away. Didn't work out, and I failed my first year. And I remember at that time, the results used to take longer time to reach from Delhi University to Shivaji College. So we went to Delhi University, and only one guy had passed in the entire batch. Some people got ER, which is called essential repeat. I don't know if it happens now, but I was like completely gone. And so I kind of recovered as like, okay, let's try again. And I don't know if Anshu ma'am remembers, that was the year when it was strike. So the faculty were on strike. So during the invigilation, we had staffs from Delhi University. And this was, I think, stats exam or some exam where I was sitting at a place where the desks were a bit broken. So I borrowed something from a friend, like cardboard. I don't know what do you guys call it now, but like, which kind of gives you a kind of a support to write. And some guy comes in and he says like, wait a second, looks like you are cheating. So I got caught for cheating. And I had to tell my parents because the results didn't come out. So there was a whole investigation that is done in North Campus. And the committee looks into the cardboard, is like, well, of course, there's nothing written that's relevant to the exam, but why did you bring this? I said, this is not my cardboard, and this was going on. So I was let go. So I managed to get 40 or 41%. I think I shared a bit with Chirag. And then actually it took a serious turn. I started studying, and a lot of the research that I do has to do with things that I have personally experienced, are things that I'm particularly curious about. So I think the curiosity is fairly important for everyone, no matter what you end up doing. So, we all put in effort, work for more hours, and at times we don't see any impact on test score. So that continued to happen. So I did work hard, no impact on test score. Somehow, the last incident before I give you the academic talk, the general one, it was the final year, and I needed exact 50% to be eligible for entrance exam. And I had enough stigma all over, like, everybody's like, okay, so especially there's a lot of pressure from parents, probably all over the world, but especially Bihari parents, like, kya karega ye ladka types. And so I worked hard. I thought I'll be okay. I was in law faculty in North Campus waiting for results, and then the results came out, and it was evening. So it's so vivid. The memory is so vivid that it was evening, and some of my friends who I used to study with, they were star students, didn't do well. So I freaked out, and in the very evening, a friend of mine who also ended up doing PhD with me, we were roommates in our master's PhD. He said, "Oh, Nishit, तुम्हारा तो सबसे बुरा हालत है, क्यों नहीं एक party देते हो हम लोगों को, ताकि we pray that you get 50%." So of course it wasn't funny, but I said, "चलिए आप लोग सबको खिलाते हैं." So we did a party that night, and the next morning I took this Ring Road bus to go to Shivaji College, waiting for I think Mr. Chauhan was one of the admin staff.
Yes.
And is he still there, or
No, he's
or
not.
he retired?
Yeah.
Okay. So I had exact 400 by 800, so exact 50% that you need. And I would still say that that was the happiest moment, even more than any other achievements in life. So that's kind of like the journey, which is interesting, taught me a lot about failures. I don't think any failures bothers me now, especially having gone through that. So I thought I'll share it with you because this is a platform where I can share about college, and I think these experiences are quite useful in life. Depends on how you take it. It's important to kind of learn from these experiences and mend ways, or maybe figure out ways what you want to do. So I'm going to talk about something that I haven't spoken in a long time. So just to give you this is definitely a paper of mine which is very close to my heart, but a paper that has been published a few years back, a paper which is about Bihar. It's about a policy that was implemented by the Chief Minister Nitish Kumar when he was first elected to power. Fascinating policy when it came out. The moment I got to know about this policy, I was like, wow, this is very interesting. Let's study this. But as a researcher, there are several challenges whenever a policy comes out. And I think Aparajita did a very good job explaining you about about data and methods. These are very crucial. The same thing was relevant here. I started this project in 2008, thought about like how I want to answer this, and eventually had to drop because I needed money to collect data, and there wasn't any data available at that time. Back in 2010, there was a conference that is organized by an institution called International Growth Center, which is based at London School of Economics, and they typically fund projects. They have an office in India at ISI Delhi, and they hosted a conference in Patna. I somehow managed to be there. One of my mentor, he's a professor at Kennedy School. He had recommended my name. Ki dekho Bihari economist hai, so why don't you guys invite him? Otherwise, even in different parts of the world, there is a different kind of caste system, which is more about this, like the institution that you go through. So the elitism is all over the place. It's not obvious that a lot of people get invited. So I just happened to be there because of him. And there was a lot of discussion going on about the policy. So especially the Deputy Chief Minister, Sushil Modi, is like, well, we have implemented something wonderful. The impact is 300%, 400%, like some crazy numbers. And somebody who is a professor at LSE, he said, well, haven't you done some work? And I said, yeah, I have done, but I didn't get to start because I need some money to collect data. And he's like, wait, we will fund this project. So the International Growth Center ended up funding this project. And that's how kind of this journey started. Karthik Muralidharan is my co-author in this project. He is a professor at University of California, San Diego. We both happened to be there in Patna at that point, and that's how we ended up being a co-author. So just to kind of give you a background, the positive news is the world has made lots of progress when it comes to addressing gender gap. Substantial progress over time. Now, more and more women have education, however, the gap still remains. And a key thing is to identify what are these barriers for girls to go to school around the world. There has been a lot of focus on social norms. Social norms are very crucial, very hard to change. I'm not going to talk about social norms here, but I'm going to talk about something more simple, which is about how do you address cost to go to school. So, and that cost could be of all kinds. You can think about monetary cost. So you live in, say, South Delhi, you have to come to Shivaji College every day. You need to pay for the metro ticket, right? Or you need to pay for some of these fees. So that's the kind of cost I'm talking about. And in schooling, these costs are very, very, I'm sure all of you remember, I'm not going to test you on the definition of elasticity, but I bet everybody knows that. So it's very sensitive to small changes in price. So enrollment decisions are very sensitive around the world, and especially for when it comes to girls' education. So this project is around addressing one type of cost, which is distance cost. It's part of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's definitely something policymakers are thinking about. So the big summary is there has been progress, but it has been very uneven. That's kind of the main. So to give you a background, like if you, I don't know how many of you, maybe some of you are from Bihar, there are large gender gaps in India. When you start looking at some of these data sets from India, and I think Prajita has talked about some of these data sets, and school attendance. So I'm not going to talk a lot about school attendance. So right now, if you look at, say, this graph, I don't know if it's visible, but the blue, the first one is about India, the second one is Bihar. The blue line is male and the red is female. And the key thing to notice is as you become older, the gap becomes larger between male and female, and this is enrollment. And similarly for Bihar, this gap is even larger. So, if you look at this current status, most villages in India have primary schools. So I don't think primary school is a concern. But when it comes to secondary school, and I mean grade 9 and 10, distance is still like a big issue. So this is another graph which is useful. This is enrollment of girls who should be roughly in secondary school by distance and gender. So this is distance to school. You can think about this being as you have a raw data and you want to verify your hypothesis. So in academic research, it's really important to come up with a very clean hypothesis. And in this case, the question that we are going to answer is the policy which was implemented in Bihar, what impact did it have on enrollment for girls? So this is distance to school and this is enrollment. And once again, you see the gap between male and female. And this gap is even larger in the context of Bihar. So, okay. So I was just looking at the chat. If you have question, please just ask question, interrupt me in between. That's very much accepted norm in economics. So with this, something that's worth mentioning is think about a policymaker. A policymaker is sitting in his office. He has 4 years to 5 years before he goes for re-election, and like somebody tells him that, hey, you need to address this issue. And how do you address issue? Like you have to construct school in long run. However, construction takes a long time, right? So you need to have few years to construct schools, but at a more fundamental level, just constructing school is not going to do everything, because you also need to run these schools at scale. So think about you need specialized teachers, especially in grade 9 and 10. Like somebody needs to teach science, somebody needs, there must, I'm guessing that there should be some kind of a lab. These days there are also computer labs. So it's not obvious that this might be the best possible thing to do. It's like, oh, let's just construct school in all villages. So this kind of tells you a bit about that this fundamental dilemma, that should you be making school all over the place, or should you be thinking about running school at scale? So this kind of tries to address or get at this cost-effective way of addressing access to school problem. So in case you're not familiar with this, this is an extremely popular program. In 2006, when Nitish Kumar came to power, it was one of his personal initiative. It's called Mukhyamantri Balika Cycle Yojana. Initially, they decided to hand over 2,000 rupees to the girls, and then it was increased to 2,500 rupees. I don't know what's the number right now. It was very high profile, something that the Chief Minister personally cared about. And something that's quite surprising when I first started thinking about the policy was, this policy cannot work. I mean, you're handing over cash to eligible students, and you're expecting them to buy bicycles and produce receipt. In a state of Bihar, you can buy a fake receipt for 200 rupees. It's no brainer. So that was my prior. My prior was, this is a pretty bad policy, which will lead to more corruption. Parents are going to take this money. So you can think about all kind of household bargaining and what can happen. So my priors were very strong that this policy is not going to work. So what this policy does in terms of like standard economics is, you can think about the policy said you have to be enrolled in grade 9, which means that you should have completed grade 8 and you have to be enrolled in grade 9. So there is a conditionality here. So the enrollment conditionality is more like a conditional cash transfer kind of setting, where you have to do something in order to get the cash. But what does cycle do? It improves the school access, right? So it makes the school, like the distance shorter, or at least not the distance shorter, like the distance cost shorter, improves the safety because you can kind of like go in a group. So it's a kind of like an effectively conditional kind transfer program. It's one of the first scaled up conditional transfer program for girls' education in India. These are pictures not taken by me. These are pictures taken by a Yale undergrad student who was also researching on this at the same time, Abhinav Nair. And I think, like, I don't know if you noticed, but something that was quite striking when I was doing the field work, these cycles are not necessarily black in color. These are very, like, pink and red. And when you speak to these girls, it seems like it was done on purpose, because boys are not going to use these bicycles because they consider this to be like more like a feminine bicycle. Another interesting feature of this policy was it was done for everyone. So as compared to, say, other states, including Uttar Pradesh or even Jharkhand, later on they did this policy, it was not done for a specific caste group. It was done for everyone. So everyone got the bicycle. And I think there is a fairly intelligent decision. Because imagine if you're in a school and there are 20 girls, and maybe these girls are from different castes. Now, obviously, if everybody got the bicycle, everyone should know, I mean, everyone should be under this impression that, oh, if you have a bicycle, that's great. But if you don't have a bicycle, people know that you don't have a bicycle or you did not buy the bicycle. But suppose you take, say, 10 girls and you only have this policy for certain caste group, then you're creating like some kind of a asymmetric information, and people, so you can think about social norm. Everybody has the bicycle, so the norms are much, much stronger here, and it kind of almost forces you to buy the bicycle. So we answered 3 questions here. First one is a question which is not very interesting for an economist, but very important for policymakers. So when, as I said, when I studied this policy, my priors were this policy will not find any impact. That was my prior. And I was definitely worried coming from Bihar that, oh, if I show no effect, definitely people are going to dislike me, and a lot of politicians do get upset. Thankfully, I'm going to show you what we find, and it worked out pretty well for us. So I'm going to tell you what's the impact of the program on enrollment, very straightforward. Then I'm going to tell you why did we find an effect. And understanding the mechanism is actually quite important, because if you know the mechanism, you can actually answer many questions. And what's the impact on learning outcome? So I'm going to skip many slides here and there, but given in the interest of time. So we find that this policy reduced gender gap by 40%. This is a fairly large number. 40% reduction in gender gap is a huge number. And that pretty much attracted attention of a lot of people. Policymakers thought that the impact would be much larger. But from an academics point of view, I think 40% is a huge number. And when we were presenting this to the education department, where the principal secretary was there, he was fairly happy with these results. And when we wrote the paper, our paper did make it to the Nitish Kumar's Facebook page, because he's like, oh, बाहर के अर्थशास्त्री लोगों ने मेरे पॉलिसी को स्टडी किया है और पाया है कि ये पॉलिसी सक्सेसफुल था. Although I mean, I'm not quite like बाहर का अर्थशास्त्री, but what was very interesting in this policy is we don't find any effect, any marginal effect of the policy if you live close to the school. So if you live close to the school, no effect. If you live too far from the school, no effect. Only in this intermediate distance, which is from 5 to 13 kilometers, is where we find an effect. We also find effects on girls passing and girls appearing for grade 10 exams. So almost like 18% of the girls, increase in 18% of number of girls who appeared for grade 10 exam, and 12% also passed. So it also had these effects beyond enrollment. So these are like learning outcomes. So we got fairly lucky. I mean, I can go on if it was a full length talk, that when you do academic research, the first stumble is the data set. We were working on administrative data set from the state of Bihar and Jharkhand, and it had lots of issues, especially after the policy was implemented. And we got lucky when we got to know that, oh, there is this district level health survey, which is perfect because it has everything that we're looking for. And it was. Is there a question?
I request.
Do you have a question or?
I think it was by mistake.
Oh, okay. So we use this DLHS survey. We also collected data, admin data. We use it for different purposes, but that's basically, that was the first stumbling point. So we look into, as I said, enrollment and learning outcomes. These are the two things that we could look at in admin data. Empirical strategy, I'm going to like skip a little bit here and talk just about the results. I think whenever you do an academic research, and especially when you're trying to establish causality, it's not straightforward, because if you think about it, standard way of, you need a counterfactual here. So it's all about finding the right counterfactual. So you need to think about, well, if every girl in grade 9 got the bicycle, so who do I compare this to? So that's the first issue here, and it's a fairly important issue. So it's a bit of a struggle, and I think this is what like the PhD training teaches you, to think about these counterfactuals. So think about it. The program was implemented state-wise. There's no control group. This happened at the time when Bihar also had a very high economic growth, almost like 14% GDP per capita. Law and order was improving at a really fast rate. So all these things kind of cause a lot of concern, like when it comes to the identification of the program. There's always risk of over-reporting, something that we did notice in the admin data. So admin data in the post years after the policy, there was a bit of over-reporting of girls enrollment, because it made a lot of sense for schools to over-report these numbers for the purpose of corruption. So what do? So we use older girls who kind of like literally just missed the program. So we don't know, I mean, think about it. So you have grade 9 and we come up with this age 14 to 15, not out of anywhere. You look at the data will tell you where, you look at the distribution of the age by grade, and that tells you what should be your roughly the treatment group and the control group. But the idea is, what we did is we looked at the older girls as the control group. It's not perfect. So just to let you know, it's not perfect. So you compare the younger girls who are in grade 9 to the older girls who kind of just missed. So that's kind of your first difference. It helps you, but not a lot. So what do you do? So you compare the exact same thing. So the younger to the older in boys. So boys acts as a second control group. Again, not perfect, but the beauty about using boys are they are exposed to exact same changes in the heart, but are not eligible for the program, right? So it helps you control for a lot of these unobservables. So including kind of household income, different kind of investment in education. Once again, not perfect, but it gets you started. So we compare girls, younger girls to older girls, and you take the difference as compared to the boys. So that is what we call second difference or difference in differences. So I will skip some of these things, but I'm going to show you the main results. What we find is the program improved girls' enrollment by 9 percentage points. And 9 is it's almost 80% increase in enrollment. But as I said, you have to, when you're trying to use a method like this, you have to make sure that what was the enrollment in pre-years? Was it following like some kind of a parallel trend? Or alternatively, you need to say that the controls that you're using, which is older girls and boys, are they valid counterfactual? So you have to establish that these are actually valid counterfactuals. When we do that, we fail to establish that they are valid counterfactual. So this is 9 percentage points. When we try to test for the parallel trend assumptions, we find that out of 9 percentage point, 5 percentage point increase in enrollment would have happened regardless. Whether there was a policy or no, that would have happened regardless. So now you take a pause that now this is not working out, because this might be okay for, if you write for, say, some kind of a policy note, but not for a serious journal. So then comes this Jharkhand, which is actually very useful. Jharkhand was part of Bihar, which means that you're not comparing apples to oranges, but maybe you're comparing two kind of apples here. And second is Jharkhand did not have the program at that point in time. So we use Jharkhand as the third difference. And when you do this third difference, as I said, the first thing you need to verify is you need to verify that boys, older girls in Jharkhand, all together, does it make it a valid counterfactual? And that's where the good news is. This coefficient, if it was statistically significant, we would not have written the paper, but we actually failed to reject the parallel trend assumption, which means that we are okay in moving forward with this comparison of older girls to the boys to Jharkhand. And what we find is it increased girls enrollment by 5 percentage points. This is our main result. This translates to 40% reduction in gender gap, big number. So mechanism. Now, this part is excellent for any policy note, that any policymaker will be very happy to see this number. As far as academic goes, like for us, it's really important to also tease out that what happened, like how did it increase? Can we say anything about the underlying mechanism? And I'll tell you why it's useful later on. So we can, even if we find this huge impact, there can be many factors that could be driving these results. So it could be the conditionality, it could be cycle, so many other factors. So what do? So you compare the impact by distance. So I'm going to skip and basically show you this graph. So this is our kind of the main result in this paper. On the x-axis, you have distance to school. Y-axis, you have the impact, which is the triple difference impact. The previously I showed you an average number, which was 5.13 percentage point increase, which is 40% reduction in gender gap. Here I'm estimating the exact same coefficient for every distance. So this is done in a non-parametric way. So if you look at this graph very carefully, here, when you're close to the school, the impact is zero. The marginal impact is zero. When you're too far away, although the standard errors are kind of bit large, but it's close to zero. And the effect is coming from this what I call as some kind of a sweet spot, that it's a distance you can potentially cycle, and that's where the impact is coming from. So what does this do? So not finding the effect in close by. So think about a household who has a girl child, and you're thinking, well, whether you give them a cycle or you don't give them a cycle, if they don't go to school when the school is in their own village, that's a fairly important point, because if I'm really worried about, let's say, this story that returns to education is changing, which means that, oh, now Bihar is becoming very prosperous, there are jobs all over the place, then you should be finding a positive impact in close by schools and also further away. The fact that you don't find any effect in close by schools tells you a lot about your counterfactual. It tells you that, maybe what you're doing is right, because if you're concerned about these external factors, you should be finding a positive impact here. So this is like a fairly was an important moment in our paper. We find that all the impact is coming from these villages which are further away from the school. This is a straightforward question. We look into what happens to girls who stay in school. So we find 18% increase in girls who are appearing for these grade 10 exam, 12% also passing grade 10 exam. An important thing that I would mention, like if anybody is curious and if you start looking into this paper, you'll find that the first version of the paper, we did not find any impact on these outcomes because we made a mistake. Thankfully, we found out the mistake and we corrected before the paper got into the next journal, but fairly embarrassing moment. So I can say a bit more about in terms of policy, that when we try to compare this policy to nothing closer to what we have in Bihar, but you can think about what are comparable programs. This policy is quite cost effective. So a similar program or a girls scholarship program in Pakistan did not have such high impact. There was another program in Bangladesh, did not have such impact. So we did some kind of a calculation and we find that cycling program in Bihar is actually fairly cost effective. Now, I will skip some of these things, and I'll move to the policy part. So in terms of policy implication, I don't know what is the policy implication because the policymaker did not reach out to researchers and say, hey, we are interested in doing this, could you help us? They had a very good sense like what should be done in Bihar, and they had the willpower, they had all the machinery to make it work, and it worked beautifully. As far as research goes, I think it's useful to kind of validate some of these programs that has been implemented. But as I said, I emphasized a bit about like understanding the mechanism is fairly important, and that turned out to be a really, really important piece for us. So I had promised that I'm going to talk about Bihar, but let me skip the Bihar part and tell a bit about Zambia. The mechanism was single most important thing that helped us do this in Zambia. So this is another project with my co-authors at my university and one PhD student from, she was also at Delhi School, now at Yale, and Anna, she's in Lisbon. So we partnered with a foundation called UBS Bank has a foundation called Optimus Foundation, World Bicycle Relief, IPA, and Ministry of General Education to conduct a large randomized controlled trial in Zambia. And the way it happened is I was presenting my cycling paper at the World Bank, and World Bicycle Relief's president, this is an organization based in Chicago, he had come to listen to the talk. Again, like I'll give him all the credit that he took so much effort. And he's like, wait, our organization does the exact same thing. So why don't you tell us the impact of our program? So I was pretty hesitant at that point. I said, look, Zambia is too far away. I'm not interested in going that far. But then UBS Foundation, the director of the Optimus Foundation, he emailed me individually, like, I have been reading this paper. These results are fascinating. I don't understand many things, but I'm very interested in you guys exploring this idea. So we ended up doing this RCT in Zambia. As I said, field work in economics is fascinating, especially when you have time, which I don't have a lot of time right now. These days, especially when you have a child and family, it becomes really hard. So it's important to understand the context, no matter where you work. It's important to understand, like, how things function. So we spent a lot of time in Zambia, understanding how things work out, and then we kind of answer slightly different questions. So we were very interested in something, even in the context of Bihar, that you provide bicycle. It's not just providing a bicycle, it's beyond that. It makes, if you spoke to these girls who got the bicycle, they are just thrilled that they own an asset. Some of them would say that, well, now my brother needs permission to use my bicycle. So it's an aspirational thing. It changes their mindset. So we were interested in understanding how the cycling program, can affect girls' aspiration, girls' empowerment. That was also something coincided with what World Bicycle Relief wanted. So we kind of look into this intervention in Zambia. We study the impact on schooling outcomes like attendance, dropout. Enrollment is not an issue in Zambia. The enrollment is, I think, around 93 or 94%. So the issue is attendance and punctuality and dropout. So we study these outcomes, but we actually study various empowerment outcomes. So we have this is the design. So in 25 schools, we provided bicycles to girls, and in this, don't think about grade 5, 6, 7 as the Indian grade, it's a bit different. And the second intervention also charged households some money. So this is what the World Bicycle Relief does. So this is their program. The treatment 2 is what they do in various countries. So they wanted us to evaluate their intervention. Although researcher pushed them that, look, let's try to do something else as well. Although it might think that treatment 1 is not very innovative, because the only difference between treatment 1 and treatment 2 is this cash. There is no cash in treatment 1. But it took us almost 6-7 months to figure it out, because we had various ideas that we wanted to try. Eventually, we ended up with treatment 1, where we only varied the cost, we removed the cost. And there is a theoretical reason why we did that, because when you remove the cost, when it is a zero cost, it makes parents less selfish, more fair. So there are these psychological arguments or theoretical arguments that how does cost impact individuals, not just the mindset, but like usage of these assets. So we use those theoretical arguments to justify why we have this intervention. This is like the design. You have no payment down, where bicycles are given to girls. You don't charge any money. And in treatment 2 is what the World Bicycle Relief does, because they are the one who are paying for everything, UBS and World Bicycle Relief. So they wanted us to validate whether their program works or not. So you provide bicycles, you charge this money to cover for maintenance and spare kits. And then you have this business as usual, which is no bicycle control schools. So there's a lot of data collection. We are still working on the project, but fairly fascinating results. We find that the time it takes for girls to go to school, so on an average, it takes a girl in our setting 110 minutes one way to go to school, 110 minutes, almost 2 hours. That time got reduced by 35 minutes one way. So almost 1/3 reduction in distance cost to school. Punctuality improved by 66%. So on average, late coming reduced by 1.45 days per week. We also had kind of a fairly large impact on absenteeism. So 28% reduction in absenteeism. Now, the interesting question is, like, a lot of people are interested in test score, which is very important. But even if you start going to school more, if you are punctual, it's not obvious how this is going to impact your test score, because it all depends on what you do with that time. I think we got fairly lucky here. We find pretty large impact on math test scores. So 0.1 standard deviation is fairly large, because if you look into literature, the impact ranges from 0.04 to 0.2. So this comes somewhere in between. And these are the outcomes that we were most interested in. We were interested in how the policy changes kind of empowerment outcomes for girls. So we look into locus of control. It's a set of questions, and we create an index. So what it means is an individual's belief regarding the control she has over the events in her life. So to what extent do you think you have control over your outcomes, life outcomes? And we find that girls who got the bicycle, their feeling of this control went up by 32%. Bargaining power. So this is again very important. Having access and control over resources and decision making. This is like very central to like this broader discussions around how to empower women. We find that girls with the bicycles reported higher access to and control over resources, more communication with parents, pro-social. So do you become more pro-social? And we find that girls were more willing to help a friend, join local clubs, their knowledge about leadership improved. Self-image, these are behavioral outcomes. So how an individual perceives herself. So we find that girls with bicycle ranked themselves higher academically and believed more in their potential for success in life. So these are like behavioral outcomes that we look at. So I'm going to stop here. It's sort of like rushed because of the interest of time. All up for questions.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Bhumika ma'am to take questions from the participants.
Thank you, Shruti. Sir, the first question for you is, how do you think COVID-19 pandemic will affect India's progress towards achieving SDG number 4, quality education?
Bhumika, very difficult question. We know that the COVID has affected learning in just too many ways. In terms of school is gone, you are relying on online education. I can tell you confidently that the online education is not the same as face-to-face education. I have been doing online education for the last few months. I see the difference. It depends on class size. So if you're teaching a class of 15 students, like I'm teaching a class of 10 or 11 students, it still works fairly well. But if you're teaching a large class, it's different. So I don't think there's a straightforward way of kind of giving you how I think the likely answer is it's going to impact negatively, and the impact will have kind of depending on where you are in this distribution, income distribution and access to resources, it's going to impact you depending on where you are in the distribution. So someone who is on the left tail will be impacted more heavily. I was having discussion with some of my friends who are at ISI Delhi, who are faculty there, and they have been struggling themselves. For example, my friend realized that, well, this whole idea that India has access to internet, there are many students at ISI Delhi who live in different parts of India, in rural parts, they don't have access to internet. So you can imagine that how this can impact in rural areas. So I believe that the divide will become much larger. But I also think this to be as an opportunity. So something that I have been talking to my colleagues here, that you can think about online teaching to complement. So for example, at least in the US, college is expensive. So you can think about another model where you can bring in, say, online degrees, which will be slightly cheaper, but will improve the access. So, I mean, one can think about similar setting in India, but in short run, I think it's just going to make the divide much longer.
Thank you,
see a
sir.
question from Sparsh Goyal, which is about potential of economic policies.
I'm about that question. Yes.
So
what is the potential of economic policies?
So Sparsh, like beautiful question, because removing social stigma, changing norms is too hard. And the success so far has been, I guess, like depressing. It's very hard to change these norms. There has been some studies which has attempted. So for example, there's a study in, maybe it's in Uganda. So there's what they did in that study, they showed a film of a famous queen about her life, and it impacted girls' educational outcomes. There's another study in India by one of my friend and co-author, Tarun Jain. He's a professor at IIM Ahmedabad, and his co-authors Seema Jayachandran and Diva, and they tried to change gender attitude in girls, in boys, in students in Haryana. My own project in Bihar, we are actually going after changing norms of police officer when it comes to gender-based violence. So, but I would say that I don't feel very confident that these are easy things to change, because economists traditionally haven't studied these things. So you're using the lens and kind of the foundation from psychology to study these outcomes. Still very new stuff in economics. I don't even know if, like, for example, if you talk to my father, he would say, where's economics here? There's no economics here. So you're talking about stigmas, norms. But yes, you have to kind of borrow learnings from different disciplines, sociology, psychology, and use techniques, rigorous techniques from economics to go after doing this. So far the evidence has been, I wouldn't say very positive. It's too hard.
Thank you, sir. In the interest of time, I would now put forth the last question. On the lines of cycle program, what the program do you think the government can adopt to reduce the gender gap in education in India?
I think you're, can you repeat that again? Your voice was breaking.
Your voice is breaking. So I think if I cannot see this question in the chat box, so if you could write.
I will repeat the question. I'll repeat the question. On the lines of cycle program, what other programs do you think the government can adopt to reduce the gender gap in education in India?
So, so I think to figure out what are these, so depends on what levels are you talking about. So for example, in the context of many states in India, you still have to worry about enrollment, because that's the first order problem. The moment you go to, when you finish your middle school where things look okay, you go to secondary and high secondary school, you're talking about a very low levels of enrollment. So that's still the first order problem. So you have to figure out about, like, thinking about various incentive that has worked. People have tried out various things, not just cycling. People have thought about information campaigns. So where you're telling parents and students about returns to schooling, you're saying, I mean, it's a very, again, a very nice experiment that was done in a different country. You go and ask student, like, do you know how much do you make? Will you make if you finish, say, high school? And people have don't have a very good sense. So let's say the actual number is 4,000 rupees per month, and you think that it's 2,000 rupees. So there is a gap of 2,000 rupees. So giving them this information in itself changes enrollment decisions. These are like easy way to do this. Similarly, you can, but the moment you go outside enrollment, the biggest issue is learning. The learning gap is just insanely bad between, say, students on the right tail and the left tail. And how to address learning gaps? I have tried few things in my experiments and things don't look so. I have an experiment in Zanzibar where we tried something very simple, asked students to set goals about scoring high in math exam. We find that students improve their effort, discipline, and everything, no impact on test score. So I think focusing on incentives to improve test score should be an important priority for any state government. I guess, like, people are trying out various things, including scholarship. Another paper that I feel is fairly important, or at least the results have wider implications, is another paper of my co-author Karthik Muralidharan. It was done in, I forgot, in Delhi, and they're expanding this in Rajasthan. So what they are doing is, they're asking students to sit down and work on these like computer-assisted programs, which is more adapted to your actual levels of learning. So, for example, I'm in grade 5. I don't know stuff from grade 2. This is the ASA report, which comes every year. So what it does is, like, you sit on a computer, you spend an hour or 2 hours, and what you do is the computer adapts to your actual level, and that they have found huge effects in Delhi, and now they are replicating in Rajasthan. So I would say the moment you go outside enrollment, you need to think about learning gap. You have to think about ways to make them more aspirational, which I think is, again, very important. How to make them aspirational? I mean, people are trying out various things, like, role model is another way to think about it. Like, there are many ways you can try to do this. I think the challenge is not knowing the ways, but the willpower to do this and to do this correctly. And I think the real trade-off is, which I guess researchers don't talk about as much. Policymakers have you can think about 5 years to do this. And by the time they are in third year, they start thinking of re-election. So you have to think about
But आना तो important होता है time से, वरना notice कर लेते हैं, आप पढ़े ही हो बहुत लंबे तक ending के announcement.
So something that I would like to emphasize, like, if you go I mean, whether some of you end up working in civil services or maybe become politician, think about, like, at least think about some vision, long-term vision. So you start your year 1, you have to think about some policies that will have political return, right? I mean, the cycle policy was popular because it also had political returns. It was very visible. Everybody, these girls were being noticed. It was all over in the news. So you need to think about political return. You can't just say that, no, I'm going to do something that is so fundamental, will not be visible, and yet I'm going to do that. That's like expecting a lot from any politicians. So I think you have to think about incentives. A policy that is visible can be done in 3 to 4 years, where you can see the returns. And if you come up with those policies, I think many policymakers will be very open to. So right now, I have been working closely with certain officials, and I'm trying to push for soft skills. I think it's relevant for all of you here. Soft skills are just so important. And we don't learn a lot of these soft skills in college. So think about investing in soft skills. Okay, so I think I'm done with any other question? I mean, we still have 4 minutes.
Anybody wants to ask, and just write it in the chat, please, chat box. I would like to ask Dr. Nishit one question from you, that while doing admissions, we have 1% relaxation for girls. So do you think at this level, at higher education level, does it in any way help more girls to enter, higher education, or it doesn't matter much?
I mean, I always feel that this is think about your relaxing constraint. Like if you believe that a girl versus a boy in high school, there are differences in terms of access, activities there at home, and maybe some of these things impact their test score in high school, then what you're doing is trying to address this gap at a later stage, at the admission stage, by giving this relaxation. I can't see this doing something bad. I mean, yeah, it's hard for me to imagine. You can think about this being like some kind of an affirmative action policies, right? But then also, when you think about this broader definition of affirmative action, which that was actually my dissertation, you think about elite capture, like who captures the benefits. And I think I don't know what that answer would be here. In my dissertation, I have studied the employment quotas in India, that how it has impacted the SC and ST employment outcomes. I find that when you have these employment quotas, it does have positive impact for scheduled caste, but actually no impact for scheduled tribe, means marginal impact. However, I didn't find much of an evidence of elite capture, and I call elite capture because I use education as one benchmark. I don't have a proper definition of what's elite. So I don't find that it's the most educated people who are benefiting. I'm finding it's the least educated people who benefited from these policies, which is a good thing, which is what policy should have intended to do. So similarly here, it all depends. Maybe you can think about like maybe you can look at the applications and who gets in, that what's their background, and like who is it really impacting? Are there ways of, so to give you kind of a much longer answer, very similar debate, even we are thinking about that, how do you address diversity in economics? Because in the US, the gender gap is actually fairly large. Like a lot of, there's an actual gender gap in economics. As an econ major, not many girls study econ. And even if they start as an econ major, they drop out. Then you have the race. And something that I recommend my colleagues, that don't just look at the GPA, because this is something that I have learned myself. All my RAs in India, I make sure that nobody has a 60%. Anybody who has 60% and above, I don't look at their application, because I feel that let me take a student who looks like me, help them do well. It has worked out very well so far. I have placed some of my students extremely well in PhD program. So I always tell that, why don't you do some kind of an interview where you look at the personal story? And I think that gives you additional leverage. So you can still do exactly what you're doing, but add this. But again, I'm sure you will have to look at so many applications that you will spend months doing it.
Yeah.
But I think a personal statement should help a bit more than just looking at this 1% relaxation.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Somebody is interested, like if you want my email ID, I think you can ask Chirag, but let me write it down here. So thank you so much for listening to these stories. Not sure if it's useful, but like if you are interested in learning about research, feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, the email ID that I have written here is correct. If you don't know my email ID, if you can Google my name, I will show up on Google. You can just feel free to email me. I'm pretty easily available. And I don't know how things are right now, but I hope everyone is well and staying healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Nishit Prakash, for answering the questions of the participants. Now I would like to invite Ms. Anshu Chopra, teacher in charge, Department of Economics, to propose the vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. It has been such an insightful and meaningful sessions today, both the one given by Dr. Aparajita and Dr. Nishit, both of them. And these sessions have shown us how much gender rigidities we have still that prevail in India and maybe across the world, I don't know. But in terms of education, in terms of female labor force participation rate. So I hope we get more gender equal over the years to come, and we have some policy measures wherein we can, address these issues as economists. I would now like to propose a formal vote of thanks. Very good evening to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Nishit Prakash, Dr. Aparajita Das-Gupta, our principal, Dr. Shiv Kumar Sehdev, my dear colleagues, and all the participants. I, on behalf of Shivaji College, extend my heartfelt gratitude to our speaker, Dr. Prakash, our alumni, and a professor at University of Connecticut, STAWS, for gracing today's webinar and speaking on one of the most pressing issues of time. I feel so proud to have taught and mentored you. It was a wonderful and insightful talk by you, and to hear your research work on steps to be taken to reduce the gender gap in secondary school education in India. Your talk would help the participants understand the gender gap in education and policy prescriptions for a more inclusive growth. Thank you so much for joining us from the other part of the globe. I'm extremely grateful to Dr. Aparajita Dasgupta, professor at Ashoka University, to take out her valuable time to be with us. You have truly enlightened the participants with your insightful and meaningful talk. Your area of expertise and knowledge in the field of gender equality have widened the spectrum of understanding the social inclusive growth and development issues. Thank you once again for joining. On behalf of the entire organizing team, I take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to our principal, Dr. Shiv Kumar Sehdev, who's always ever encouraging and motivating us to reach greater heights. His complete trust in us motivates us not only to live up to his expectations, but also go much beyond them. Dr. Shiv, with his inspiring and powerful leadership, has been the driving force which has led our college to organize many meaningful webinars, both at national and international level. Thank you so much, sir. This event has been a collaborative effort of Department of Economics and Alumni Relations Cell of Shivaji College. I thank the convener of ARC, Dr. Darshan Pandey, and his team for their unconditional support. My heartfelt thanks to you, Dr. Darshan. Your support made it possible for us to connect to our alumni. I express my sincere thanks to Ms. Bhumika Bhavnani, the co-organizer of this event, who was with me from conception to completion of this webinar. Thank you, Bhumika, for your unconditional support. My heartfelt thanks goes out to Iti Dendona and all other faculty members of my department for their constant support. I would also like to mention my special thanks to the President and other office bearers of the Economic Society for handling all the tasks and responsibilities with utmost efficiency and sincerity. My special mention goes out to Arsh, Shruti, Tanishq, and Chirag for all their efforts. I would also like to thank the ARC team for being in touch with me throughout. Last but not the least, I thank all the participants from the depth of my heart for being proactive and taking the initiative for being extraordinary learners. Once again, my heartfelt thanks to everyone involved in making this event a huge success. I would now like to invite Dr. Darshan, convener of ARC, to say a few words. I would pass on to Dr. Darshan. Thank you.
धन्यवाद मैम, औपचारिक रूप से आपने धन्यवाद कर दिया है। मैं बस धन्यवाद करना चाहता हूँ इकोनॉमिक्स डिपार्टमेंट का और खासतौर पर आपका कि आपने एलुमनी रिलेशन सेल के साथ मिलकर एक अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर का एक वेबिनार आयोजित किया है। तो निश्चित रूप से एक बहुत अच्छा कार्यक्रम रहा है। और निशीत जी को नमस्कार करता हूँ। निशीत जी के पास शायद ये परिचय नहीं आया होगा, मैं भी शिवाजियन हूँ और आपने 96 में शायद ज्वाइन किया है, मैंने 94 में ज्वाइन किया था, तो मैं 97 में पास आउट हूँ। तो शायद हम लोग कभी आपस में टकराए होंगे, लेकिन अब वो तो मैं हिंदी विशेष का छात्र था, हिंदी ऑनर्स में। तो आपने जो शुरू में कहा ना कि उस समय परसेंटेज बड़ी हम लोग तो 50% आने पर भी उछल जाते थे। तो स्टार्टिंग में जो आपने बात की तो वो मुझे थोड़ा सा एकदम से वो याद आ गया अपना समय कि हम लोग उस समय क्या समय था और आज का क्या समय है। 97% लाकर भी बच्चे की श्योरिटी नहीं कि उसको एक अच्छे कॉलेज में दाखिला मिल जाएगा। तो बहुत अच्छा लगा। चूंकि अर्थशास्त्र विषय था तो मेरे से थोड़ा सा, मैं काव्यशास्त्र का व्यक्ति हूँ तो अर्थशास्त्र तो इट्स अ वंडरफुल वेबिनार। थैंक यू वेरी मच सर। और अपराजिता जी का भी धन्यवाद और आप सभी का थैंक यू मैम।
Thank you so much, and we would request the participants to leave. Thank you.
Thank you. And how are you doing, Anshu ma'am?
Yeah, I'm very fine. If you can wait for a second, we can have a group photograph with you and the
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. So next time when you come to India and Delhi, let's catch up, because last time, sorry, we couldn't do that.
I know. I will.
Yeah.
I'm definitely planning to, but it all depends on
Yeah.
COVID.
Everything depends on COVID now. Yeah, that's true. So I request my everybody to can switch on their videos so we can have a kind of a group photograph.
मुस्कुराता हुआ चेहरा सबका आना चाहिए.
जी बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. अब ये सब everything is virtual mode, so we have to be prepared for all these things.
But think about like taking advantage of this. Like it's very hard to do this if it was not virtual.
Yes, absolutely. Aditi, can you do the favor of taking a group picture, please? Just let everybody switch on their cameras. Let's wait for a while. So I would, Dr. Nishit, I would introduce Iti. She's one of our senior members of the department. Iti Dandona, she's there.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah, hello.
Yes, hello.
I joined in 2001.
I see. So, yeah, I was at Delhi school from 2000 to 2002. Tak.
Okay, I joined Shivaji College in 2001. So
I see. It must have changed a lot.
Oh yes, you come over here, you'll see so much of changes. No broken benches now, what you mentioned. So we don't have any broken benches and all. Things are very different now. Yeah, infrastructure wise also, otherwise also. Yeah, and even the intake of students is very good now. I mean, they are very proactive and yeah.
True.
Yeah. That seems obvious from LinkedIn, like how active they are. So
yeah, they are. Yes, they are quite active now. So it's all the hard work of the students, and because normally we feel that organizing such events is more of a students' thing. They should be doing it rather than the teachers getting involved. So we try to give them as much of experience and exposure to these things.
And helping them gain the soft skill, which I think is
Absolutely. What you said was very right. That's very important. Yeah, that's still missing here.
I remember I have he's like one of my favorite student. So undergraduate में thesis, it's very hard for faculty. Like PhD students se work karna aasan hai, undergraduate it's a bit more painful. So he convinced me that he'll work hard, and he was in my class, and he wrote me an email saying, "Hey, professor." So I spent like almost half an hour giving him a lecture that why this is such a terrible idea. And I said that, yes, I'm friendly with you. You can say anything, but imagine if you are in real world in corporate, and suppose कि किसी को गलती से भी बुरा लग गया, तब तो तुम्हारा बहुत महंगा पड़ेगा. And and this guy, so he finished his bachelor's, he just finished his MBA from UC Berkeley and McKinsey में काम कर रहा है. And he wrote to me that every time somebody praises him for his demeanor, he remembers of this incident.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, Professor Nishit, I need a favor from you. If you can, if you know few of your batchmates, and if you can just share their contact numbers with us.
हम अभी भी live हैं, I think on YouTube पर.
हाँ, मैं live को